Hey everyone, welcome to Group Text. I cannot wait to talk to my guest today, Nicholas Hatton. He is one of the producers on the inventively funny smash hit Jury Duty, which has garnered 4 primetime Emmy nominations for Outstanding Comedy Series, Outstanding Writing for a Comedy Series, Outstanding Casting for a Comedy Series, and my favorite, Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series for James Marsden in his role as James Marsden, Juror Number 14. The premise of Jury Duty is simple. We watch a fake trial performed by actors, except for one person on the jury who believes the trial is totally real. So it's part sitcom, part social experiment, part for the production crew anyway, Danger Act, and it is fantastic. Here to take a deep dive into how he pulled off an 8-episode hoax on unsuspecting Ronald Gladden, the adorably sweet, funny man from Southern California, is Nicholas Hatton. Welcome to Group Text. Did I summarize it?
Your logline is better than the one that I did. So, yes, you should have actually made the show. That was a perfect summary. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here chatting with you.
I loved the show. Okay, but for people who haven't seen it, explain the premise.
The premise is it is a documentary style project in which a camera crew is given unprecedented access to a civil trial in Los Angeles, following proceedings from jury selection all the way through to the final verdict. The twist being one of the jurors is in fact our Truman, and the entire show is about that person. And the task of the show is to take him from the beginning through to the end with hopefully a satisfying conclusion, and that he is none the wiser until we reveal the truth to him in our penultimate episode. That's what Jury Duty is, and we don't think anyone had ever done this before. Anyone actually tried to Truman Show a guy, truthfully, for a long period of time. And that was the challenge. That was the mountain we tried to climb, and we lucked out. Yes, we did. Yes.
So, how did you get involved?
I got involved because a very good friend of mine is a guy named Todd Shulman, who I worked with when we made stuff with Sacha Baron Cohen. Mm-hmm. He was a longtime partner of Sacha's. And through him, we worked together, and I did a show called Who is America on Showtime, and then a movie called Borat, subsequent movie film.
Yeah, and a couple people have seen it.
A few people have seen it. Wacky foreign journalist. And as we were getting to the end of Borat 2, Todd called me and said, "Listen, I've got an idea, and I think you're the one who can do it." And he pitched me this very simple idea of, what if we had a sitcom, but we replaced one of the characters with a real person who was not aware that they're in a sitcom? And what if we could also give that person a hero's journey? And what if at the end, like 12 Angry Men, they could be Henry Fonda standing up for truth and justice in a room full of people who just want to go home? Could we do that? And that sounds like a good idea. Oh, sure, I can pull off. He was like, "Do you want to do it?" And I said yes, because and truthfully, finishing Borat, doing stuff with real people is really, really hard, because it just adds multitude levels of complexity to everything that you have to do, because you're hiding in plain sight, essentially. And any mistake, any sloppiness can expose the whole game. And the idea of creating such a complicated and choreographed journey for one individual over 3 weeks of their life, and not just for the hours that you're shooting at court, for 24 hours a day, they are in our fake world. The idea of doing that was pretty scary and possibly stupid. But I also thought, I really did love the fact that, that the idea was always to make this person have a memorable experience that they could be proud of, and be proud of what they did as a part of it. And that to me was really, that was admirable. And if we could pull that off and everyone could feel good about this experience, both people who've watched it and the guy who's actually going through it, then that would be worthwhile entertainment, I guess. And here we are now.
Okay, I have a tendency to over-intellectualize things, but I think you just beat me.
Sorry.
That's okay. And the use of the word penultimate, I'm like, oh, we could be friends. Every now and again, you got to flex your vocabulary, like I say. And I part of me allowed myself to get involved. It's hard, though, as someone who has worked live, done all these kinds of things, as a producer and a performer. I sat there and I thought, how do you even storyboard this? But more importantly, you had to reverse engineer this in a way. How did you even do that? You know, we've all worked in a room with a whiteboard. Did you guys I would think you would have had to reverse engineer the entire thing.
That's pretty close to what it was. Yeah, your instincts are right. We knew that we needed the 12 Angry Men moment. So you start from there and work backwards. And we always knew that it was going to be roughly 8 episodes. So that's how you start essentially structuring the experience. And then you actually lean into the legal proceedings and you go, well, actually, what is the shape of a civil trial? And we had an incredible lawyer in our writer's room. His name is Evan Williams. He also plays Sean, the defendant's attorney, the hapless defendant's attorney. And he was our sort of legal guide and guru through that writing experience. And we were able to realize, we actually have a structure here. We have a shooting structure. So we know that for a couple of days, there's going to be the voir dire. So we're going to have lots and lots of extras. And they're going to be seeing people, speak to attorneys. And then we're going to go to witness arguments and then so on and so forth. And that gave us a loose structure. And then from there, you just keep digging deeper and deeper. So for example, now that you have the structure, you go, hour to hour, how are we going to move through scenes when you can't have an AD in there pushing people along when it's just the actors doing it? So then you have to work out what those processes are like and how our actors can be communicating with us in the control room. And so everything just kind of goes from that, there's broad strokes, and then filters on down into the day by day. And that whole process probably I'd say it took about a year to year and a half to when I started thinking about building this sort of sandbox that Ronald would be playing in for 3 weeks to then actually executing it. And because you have to try and think about every single contingency and eventuality you possibly can, because it could happen and it could destroy the whole thing. And if you haven't thought about it, then you no longer have a TV show, and that's a bad result.
Yes,
so
that
yeah,
is.
a lot of thinking had to go into it, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, again, like working live, you had to have A plan, B plan, and then you also had to be prepared for C, D, and E. And then, oh my God, F could happen too, but we'll deal with that when we get there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you're like this. Okay, Ronald. Such a lovely person.
Yeah, he is a sweetheart.
How did you guys find him?
So we found him. So I work with a producer named Alexis Sampietro. We work together on Who is America and on Borat. And her specialty has been to find the real people you see in these projects. And usually she's finding rather unpleasant, local politicians or people with particularly heinous and bigoted views for us to then go and expose. This was quite a reverse for her, which was, we need you to find just an absolute angel of a human being, please. And someone who ideally can roll with the punches a little bit and can maintain their sort of, can keep up their grace and humility and niceness whilst wacky things are going on around them. And most importantly, someone that an audience can really root for and invest in. Because if the audience isn't rooting for Ronald, then we also don't have a TV show at that point. And so she used a lot of the techniques and the dark arts that she's perfected over the years to find like not nice people, to find a nice person. And it starts with over 4,000 people essentially submitting tapes to be what they think is potentially part of a jury pool in LA, and not much more information than that. And then she'd spend a lot of time with folks over Zoom and such, getting to know them and trying to get a sense of their personalities. And then it comes down to a top 10 list, and gut instinct and intuition. It's an art. It's not a science. You don't know for sure. People are really, really, really complicated, especially when you put them in stressful situations. So you kind of just have to lean on your gut. And Alexis, to her credit, from day one, Ronald Gladden was number one. And she's like, this guy has it. He's a nice dude and people are going to fall in love with him. And she was very correct.
It's interesting because you actually answered my next question, which was, how did you find someone so committed to doing jury duty that they didn't do what the rest of us do, which is postpone, postpone, postpone? So did he already have jury duty, and did you say, look, we're going to put you into jury duty?
So the way we did it was he was not already on jury duty. What we had, one of the very important conditions for our candidates was that they had never done jury duty before, because if anyone had, they would be with us for 30 minutes and realize that we don't know what the hell we're doing. We're a bunch of clowns and none of this procedure is correct. So it had to be someone who was completely naive to the experience of being on jury duty. And what he thought was that there was this judge in a southern district in LA who was willing to allow documentary cameras into his court. And because of COVID, and this is true,
right,
the number of respondents to jury duty is very, very low. And he was open to having this production company essentially supply some more jury-eligible jurors for the pool. And maybe they'd get picked during voir dire, maybe they wouldn't. And that's what Ronald understood going into this. And for him, it's a really good point about, like, most people don't want to do jury duty. This kind of encapsulates Ronald. He just sold his solar panel contracting business, and he was kind of in a place in his life where he just wanted to do something different and have a new experience. And he thought, here's a little janky documentary about some case in LA, and they'll put me up, and who knows, say yes to stuff, see what life has to offer. And then we are where we are right now.
So there were a million opportunities for the show to go completely off the rails, starting with what if he had figured it out? Was there a moment when you thought, oh shit, he knows something is not right?
Yeah, when I think it was day, I can't remember which day of shooting was, but it was still relatively early on, and the character of Todd, played by the genius David Brown, he's the sort of the one with his own inventions and his own wild and wacky mind. He came into the courthouse with chair pants, which were his own invention, which were a couple of crutches strapped to his ass. And he walked into the courthouse, and our security guard, Kerry O'Neill, who's also a writer on the show, stops him and he goes like, "What the hell are you doing?" Ronald is behind him in the security line, and he turns to Noah, played by Meki Leeper, and says, "This is a reality show." And because we are 15 feet away in the control room, and we have a bank of monitors in front of us with every single feed we have, and we're listening to everything live. And when he said that, I nearly pooped a bit, because I thought, oh, the whole thing is now, the jig is up, essentially. And he did that a couple of times, but we then realized after the fact that it's like, he's just articulating a way to explain, like it's just his mind is processing like, this is a weird thing, okay. And he's just kind of going through it. But yeah, that was the first time I really thought that we were done. And that was a terrible, terrible feeling.
What I kept thinking too is, what if he had walked through one of the wrong doors and suddenly ended up in the control room? Like, because there were a lot of fake walls and doors where you had hidden cameras and all sorts of stuff. What if he just suddenly went, oh, I meant to go left, but I went right and opened a door?
That is literally the challenge of the show. Well, that's how I'd always think about it when designing it is, what if he takes a right when he's meant to take a left? So what can you do in that situation? You can lock right? You can barricade right. But if you do that and you're a real person, you're like, well, why is this thing barricaded? That seems a bit strange. And so you're just arousing more suspicion. So you have to put these sort of subliminal controls around him so that he doesn't ever figure that kind of stuff out. And honestly, it was just a lot of really robust thinking by a lot of the crew. And we would walk through his world and do that kind of stuff and be like, well, what would stop me from going up those stairs? And you go like, well, maybe if we let them know that actually only core employees can go up there, so we should have a sign, we should have someone posted there. Well, this door we just never open. The rule is this door never, ever, ever opens. And you would apply that kind of stuff to every single literal door that you could. And then also you would have backup plans in case something was discovered. So, for example, in the deliberation room where they spend most of their time chatting and having lunch and all that kind of stuff, there are two-way mirrors all up in that thing, which have been built when we rehabilitated the courthouse. And when you walked in there the first time, you're like, these are very cool. Like, they match the paint, they match the finish. The production design team are absolutely incredible. But there was a thing of, but they are still massive mirrors in a room. That's still a strange thing. So it's like, well, why would this exist? You go, for closed court cases, if there is someone who is a protected witness, or there's something sensitive going on, like they might be a minor, or there might be something to do with organized crime, all those kind of things, you can maybe then put them in. And so you can't start creating these realities in case anything goes wrong. And that's something which our then field producers who are handling Ronald can go and be like, oh yeah, I think they used it for like mafia cases back in the day. And that's what, so this is the kind of stuff that we would apply to basically every single thing that you see on screen had some sort of narrative behind it that we could use in case everything went wrong.
It just popped in my head that just shows you, again, how sweet Ronald is, because he would never think, like, he doesn't have a devious mind to go, like,
fantastic.
You know, what is happening, you know, right? And maybe it's just the business we come out of. The rest of us would be going, I know something's there. I was just, this must have been a script supervisor's and a continuity supervisor's worst nightmare.
It was not easy for that. Yeah, very, very, almost an impossible job, actually. And you kind of just have to write it out. You may or may not notice as you watch the show that there are some costume things which don't completely match up. Was because we didn't. What we see in the final episodes is not exactly in order for comedic effect or what have you. So maybe Noah has a tie on one thing and doesn't in others. And we got really, really, during the editing process, we got very nervous about that. I was like, oh, it's going to pull people completely out of the show. They're going to be, oh, the magic will be undone. And then we realized when we started testing, it's like, no one gives a crap. No one cares. As long as they're invested in the characters and they're invested in the premise, they just want to be entertained and enjoy the whole thing. And that ended up being correct.
The cast is fantastic.
Amazing.
The cast is fantastic. All basically unknowns, although at the top of their improv game. How did you find these people? And they're all, by the way, they all are brilliant, and like, this is something for their reels. They should all be getting offers once we all go back to work.
Yes, from your mouth to God's ears. They did incredible work. Susie Farris was our amazing casting director, and we didn't give her a lot to work with, to be honest with you. We're like, find us some jurors, and here are some very rough kind of like archetypes of what we're looking for, but we want it to be a complete cross-section of society. We want a lot of different people represented in there, like they would be if they were going to court. And we did something kind of fun, which is we did this for our callback. We hired out a focus group facility in Westwood, and we invited real people to come and take part in our focus group. And we also invited our auditioning actors on callbacks, and we told them, when you set foot in the building, there will be no one to come greet you. You will have no instructions. You just have to create a character for yourself. Here's a couple of games we would like you to try and play, improv games if you can. We will not tell you who is real. We will not tell you who the other actors are, but come in with us for an hour and enjoy the experience. And through that, they love it. That's the lifeblood of the work.
When you ask people what's your favorite part of the process, that's usually it.
Absolutely. And so, but the thing for us is like, hey, at least we're doing something which they've not done before, and it's not the usual thing. It's like, oh, and so what you find in those instances is that people who would send in tapes can be obviously unbelievably funny, hilarious, talented people. When you put them in a situation around real people, and they are, again, hiding in plain sight, and there is a game that you are playing that person absolutely cannot discover, some folks would really retreat within themselves, and they wouldn't go for a joke. They wouldn't take any risks. And so ultimately, they don't really give you anything. And then other folks who would really, really push it and really, really go for it, and then you'd start getting side eyes from the real people around the room being like, what is happening? Are we in the middle of a bit here? And so that process really allowed us to find people who were able to shine and find that middle ground, essentially. And that was a hell of a lot of fun. And I'll say this, James has been rightly recognized for how incredible his work is. He's a genius in it, and he's a lovely human being. Like, I hope he gets every single award possible. It truly is an ensemble. And the whole cast as a whole are what made this thing possible. And I really hope, I know that certain awards like SAG and stuff, they actually have ensemble categories. And I'm really crossing my fingers for them, because it feels like that category was invented for our cast on this show.
The cast is brilliant. But I want to touch on James for a second. I mean, who knew him? And then how do you explain to his agent, we want James Marsden to play James Marsden, alternate juror number 14, asshole actor. Like, I mean,
it's a big ask.
It's a big ask. Did someone know him?
Yeah. So Dave Bernard, one of the other producers, he had a long-standing personal relationship with James. They'd also worked together on some pretty cool projects. And we always knew there was going to be a celebrity in the role that was written into the scripts, but we didn't know exactly who that person would be. And Dave knew James. They were having dinner. It was like, what do we think about James for this? And we were like, well, yeah, he's a movie star. He's freaking fantastic in everything he does, and he's funny. We'd seen the D Train and things like that. We knew he could be a really funny guy. And I think the conversation went pretty well, because James just likes to try new stuff and likes to challenge himself. And he doesn't have airs and graces. He's not a particularly pretentious guy. He doesn't have a lot of those Hollywood trappings. And there's an opportunity to do something which no one had ever done before. And he could just go nuts and just find it himself. And he also didn't come from an improv background. He's not one of those improv kids. And this was a chance for him to try something and flex some muscles that he wasn't, he wanted to test out. And he really dove into it head first. It was an easier sell than you'd actually think.
Easier sell to him, but not to the agent.
Yeah, quite.
But I'm shocked to find out he didn't have an improv background. And
not formally.
And he encapsulates everything we all hate about actors in it. Whose idea was it to call the paparazzi? Because that was genius. Who came up with the idea of having him pretend to call paparazzi?
It was a workshopped effort from the writers' room. We had a 10-week writer room on this show. The show is written, and
as much as it can be.
As much as it can be. It's kind of shocking how many key storylines, character elements were devised in that room, and you end up seeing on screen. And the paparazzi, we knew we had to your point earlier about working backwards, we knew we had to get to sequestration. Sequestration was so important in the production process, because we had to take Ronald's phone away from him. We had to take away his ability to access real-time information because of the fakery of everything around him, right? He couldn't be Googling the factory, because he would realize that factory isn't what the factory actually is, or what have you. So we had to get to sequestration, which meant taking the phones away. So how do you do that? We have to trigger some sort of event. And we had this it took us weeks in terms of all these different things that could happen. Could someone have a heart attack? Could someone divulge information? Could you have a all this kind of silly, wacky, insane stuff? And paparazzi ended up being just about the cleanest way in. But even then we were really, really nervous. Is he going to buy that this is happening, that paparazzi are coming to this courthouse in Huntington Park, California, to pap James Marsden? And he did, because James sold it brilliantly. He sold it perfectly well.
I love when James is quizzing him about his resume, all the different signing the DVD, and this poor guy goes out and buys it. I mean, it's just, James is so spot on, and I don't want to give stuff away, but in the factory, I could not stop laughing.
He's so funny. He's hilarious. So funny, and it's sort of weird that someone that the kind of movie star, he's insanely good looking, and you kind of have certain, I don't know, you kind of have certain prejudices about what a person like that would be like in real life or how they work. And he's just so goddamn funny. And there's so much stuff we didn't use of him because there's only so much bloody screen time. No, he's amazing. And honestly, I can't imagine the show obviously without Ronald, and I also cannot imagine the show without James. I don't know what that looks like.
With the actors, you and the writers and the directors had the power to kind of steer the reactions. But with Ronald, you had to sort of take a step out and say, what would be his reactions? We have to be ready for reaction A, reaction B, reaction C. And I have been on a show where those things have gone completely off track. I did a reality show, like a competition reality show. And when they asked me to do it, they were expecting me to be one kind of particular person. And I ended up being the polar opposite. And a very good friend of mine was one of the EPs on it. And later she told me, she goes, you know, you threw the entire show into chaos. And she's like, I told them that's not who you were. But, you know, and it did. It threw the entire production into complete and total chaos. How did you prepare for that? I mean, and how did you nudge him the way you wanted him to go? I mean, obviously he is intrinsically a really nice guy, but everybody has their limits. I would have thrown the notebook at someone when they couldn't figure out a freaking lunch order. I mean, everybody at one point does lose it. I would have been like, y'all figure it out.
You start with the person's personality. As in, you're exactly right. In terms of Ronald was his own sort of, he kept himself on the rails for us, which is kind of remarkable. And that he went everywhere. His natural inclination was to go where we wanted him to go. So that's the first thing. And then after that, you have these sort of support mechanisms built around him. So you have James. James is very important because we found, our theory was that if you have a choice of taking a left or taking a right, if there's a very famous or influential person next to you, and they say, I don't know, I think left feels pretty good, more often than not, the real person will go, oh, you think, okay, yeah, left, let's go left. That seems like a good, it's a, you know, a little unconscious influence there as well. The rest of our cast could do that too in terms of guiding him. You see a lot of that in Margaritaville with Maria Russell, who plays Inez, like in terms of coming over and helping us get at the table. In terms of the arm wrestling, that's when Cassandra comes in and starts really egging him on that way. So there's an element of peer pressure going on too. Those are your first two things. And then you have the fallback of the court, which is really, really powerful, which is he doesn't know any better. So we could just say the judge has a rule. This is how this court works. So you have to do it like this. So that creates sort of barriers and ring fences him somewhat as well. And then finally, we have the documentary team, and they could say stuff like, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do this because we're trying to get this shot. Would you mind? Blah, 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 blah. So you're creating all of these sort of barriers around him, which hopefully, well, bumpers, let's call them bumpers, which can generally nudge him along in a certain way. But again, it all starts with his natural inclination. And we were really, really lucky that he's a nice dude who tends to go along with folks.
Did you have a therapist, or did you guys work with a therapist or a behavioralist? Because you're clearly very well versed in all the psychological mumbo jumbo dark arts to get someone to do what you need them to do.
I have a therapist. Hell yeah. Shout out to Dr. Rice.
Hey, Dr. May. Dr. May. Hey, Dr. Rice, Dr. May.
Lifesaver, actual genuine lifesaver. And I will say this, I talked through when this was still just an idea before we actually started doing this thing. I have to say, I spoke with her a great deal because honestly, and this is getting slightly personal, I had to square away any ethical issue considerations that I had and pursuing this thing, because what if this goes wrong? And I don't mean like, oh, it's not funny or he finds out. What if he has a really bad time? What if he's actually hates this thing and you realize you're the person who brought this experience to him and dragged him through it? That's kind of a heavy thing to deal with. So I spent a lot of time working through, what are the ways that we can, as best as possible, guarantee that doesn't happen. Spend a lot of time in therapy figuring out what's cool and what's not cool, what's right and what's wrong. And we did have a therapist on hand for Ronald before the experience started, during the experience, and then afterwards. And the way that worked was we said, well, the documentary, we're kind of interested in charting people's psychological progress and making sure that everyone's okay being on camera during this thing. And that was the way that we sort of slipped in what became a really important producing procedure for us, which is doing a mental health check with Ronald as he's on this thing, and is he okay? And so he would have calls, Zooms, I should say, with our therapist whilst he was at the hotel. And we would pretend that all the other casts are doing it as well, because everything has to seem real. So they would just say like, oh, how is Dr. John for you? Did he ask you about any pets? Oh, yeah. So everyone had to, have their own fake therapy check-ins as well. But we did it for real with Ronald before, during, and after. Because obviously, once the truth is revealed, then that's just a waterfall of realizations pouring over Ronald. Everything that he's done for the last 3+ weeks, he's then like re-examining all that kind of stuff. And we wanted to make sure that he felt psychologically supported as he was wrapping his mind around this completely insane thing.
Isn't it? You have to have that kind of support. And here's the difference: is you went to therapy to deal with, ethical issues. I would have been saying to my therapist, okay, we have 100 to spend, but do you think 50 would be okay? Do you think, or do we need? Do I split the difference and go 75? The network would be much happier. It would help the budget. See, that's the difference between us. He could have lost his ship, but I would think $100,000 probably eased the pain.
Yes.
The actors were all sequestered. We're just the ones who were supposed to be staying at the same hotel with Ronald sequestered or living in the hotel, and the other guys got to go home. By the way, love how you figured that out with James. With the fake, I can pay for my own bailiff to be in the house.
Yeah, that was exactly correct. So essentially the younger cast really ended up being the ones who stayed in the hotel, because actually, frankly, they aren't necessarily children at home, or they're of an age where they can probably put up with that stuff a little bit more. And also, they're a bunch of psychos who are just really into it. Like, they just loved it. They're a bunch of freaks. But the rest of our cast would stay in the other hotel, and we had to devise a plan, which is like every day court finishes and there are 2 minivans waiting, and we'd see, I would go court hotel A, hotel B, one would go back, the Ronald van would go to the hotel, and those actors we would not see again until the next morning when they come up in character. And then all the other van circles the block, comes back to the courthouse, we assemble all our cast and remaining crew in the courtroom, and we talk about the day. And we say, what did we achieve? What are the story beats we hit? What unexpected things happened that we need to keep track of? What is now real information that exists in this world that is now part of like the canon, what we can't lose? How do we achieve what we need to achieve tomorrow? All that kind of stuff. And that was the fun of it is a really collaborative process, because we really gave everyone a chance to talk during those things and give us their feedback, because it was very fluid. No one had ever done it before. So people would have really legitimate considerations about how we were doing things, how we were treating Ronald, how we were going to capture stuff. And we all kind of figured it out together. It was a very cool collaborative process in that way.
The way you guys all stayed so light on your feet, as I like to say, was brilliant. I know there's one moment where someone says someone else's bag and uses the person's real name. But I mean, that's the fun of it, is having to stay that light on your feet. Do you think this would end? I mean, also, by the way, brilliant how you worked COVID in, because if things weren't ready or you had to rehearse, say, oh, the COVID tests aren't back yet.
That was my thing. That was probably my favorite devious thing that I've ever done, was using this terribly traumatic global pandemic to allow us to rehearse.
Hey, you got to do what you got to do. Do you think there'd be any other scenarios where this would work? Or, I mean, this really has to be a one-off. Well, I mean, doing it as jury with the success of this, you're not going to be able to pull it off another jury.
I think that would be a challenge, practically speaking, but also I feel like this show is a bit of a magic trick, which people really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And it felt like one whole complete magic trick over 8 episodes, and it felt people left it feeling like they've experienced this whole thing in its entirety. It feels like one story. Doing it again, it's kind of like doing, if you did it in a courthouse again, it feels like, oh, you're just doing the same magic trick, but we're just changing the color of the cloth or something.
Right.
So you probably wouldn't want to necessarily do that again, but who knows? The world is full of possibilities, and I know that there's going to be, I guarantee there's going to be a lot of TV shows on the air in 2025, which will have a real guy in the middle of some shenanigans-y situation. And good luck to them. Because I think my word of warning is you've really got to care. You've got to give a shit about your real person. Because if you don't, then you could have a really not great experience on your hands. So I know there's going to be a wave of these things. We were the first ones to do it. We feel very honored and lucky to have done that. And I know there's going to be a bunch of folks who do. It's jury duty, and good luck to them. But I hope they care. Is all I have to say about that. Because again, you're taking someone's literal life into your hands for this period of time. Anything that happens to them over these weeks, it's on you. So you better make it worthwhile and have thought it through.
How's Ronald now? And suddenly he's famous.
He's so freaking famous.
Suddenly he's famous.
It's so nuts. And I was at a festival in Austin a few months ago called the ATX Festival, and we went out drinking, and it was great fun. And we went to a honky tonk, and it was midnight when we got in there. Everyone was kind of sloppy, this place, and it was like sawdust on the floor. All really good fun stuff. And we walk in, and when Ronald walks in, the entire bar turns and stares at him, and then they just start flocking. And they do this thing like they just kind of want to just touch him. It's like touching like Jesus's garb or something. It's like this holy man. And they've revered and loved him. It's like it's the whole parasocial relationship thing. People genuinely love this man, and he had no idea who they were. And I've not seen that before. I've been around lots of famous people, and I've seen crowds get excited for them and stuff. I had not seen that sort of like reverence and love that people had for him. And it's mind-blowing. It's still the case now. He's having a whale of a time. He goes from premieres to the ESPYs to commercials of frickin' Ryan Reynolds, to everyone telling him around the world that they love him. And he's managed to keep his feet on the ground, which is the nicest bit of all of it. He's still the same dude. He's still a nice, agreeable, funny, regular guy. And I will say, when we were prepping this, and I would get nervous about the outcome and could we pull it off, and are we doing the right thing here? To comfort myself, I used to visualize him being on like a talk show couch and talking with some host and yucking it up. And in my wildest dreams, I never thought that he would be having this level of sort of fame and joy and success right now that he is. So that's a blessing.
So before I let you go, there are a few Easter eggs
in
the show. The one I caught at the very end was one of the executive producers is a woman named Cody, which if you've seen the show, you understand what that means. Or did I miss other Easter eggs?
There are loads. Some of them didn't actually make it onto screen, but yeah, Cody, our showrunner. Lone Pine is the town of Lone Pine is essentially where Cody's dad lives near there. It's this little desert ghost town essentially. The law firm that Trisha LaFache represents is Hella Weinberg Hatton LaSur, so named after all of us. We're a bunch of egotistical maniacs essentially, just dropping our names everywhere that we could. I mean, if we dare get to be on camera. There's lots of little stuff like that dotted around the place. The manager, Jean-Paul Cantonard of the factory, he actually does own that factory. That is his factory. And as he was showing us around all the stuff, we're like, oh, he should just be the guy who shows them around the stuff because we don't know what the hell we're talking about. And he was lovely and French and laid back. And he was called Cantonard because that was my favorite soccer player growing up. So we just we filled the reality with our own little personal whims and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it is absolutely one of my favorite shows of the last year. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed it. Yeah. I am so endlessly in awe and amazed from a producing point of view of what you managed to pull off. Absolutely brilliant.
Well, thank you very much for watching it. And we wanted to make something in a certain way, and there was a world in which no one even watched it because it was on this little platform that no one was new and no one had ever heard of. And at the end of the day, we certainly didn't envisage this being like a big hit, successful show. We just wanted to see if we could pull off this experiment and feel good about it. So to be here talking with you now and knowing that watched and loved the show, and that lots of other people around the world have had the same reaction. It feels a bit insane, but it's lovely and wonderful.
Thank you so much.